Hello and welcome to Expat Chat. I'm John Colditz with Fluency Corp. If you're joining us live, please let us know in the chat where you're joining us from today. If you're not familiar with us, our coaches are located around the world, and we help busy professionals improve from conversational fluency to business proficiency, working in a second language so they can communicate clearly and confidently with colleagues and clients. We're happy to share expat experiences with you. And today I'm joined by Celeste Lawson. She's a relocation strategist and founder of Melanin Tours. So give Celeste some love in the chat and be sure and ask any questions you'd like her to answer, and we'll try and get to those. Welcome, Celeste.
Thanks for having me, John.
So looking forward to hearing your story. Tell us a little bit about where you're originally from.
Sure. I was born in New York, Queens, New York. When I was 4 years old, my grandmother decided to round up the whole family and move us down to her hometown in Columbia, South Carolina. And so I
Wow.
grew up there. Big culture shock. Went from New York City to growing up on a dirt road. We had a couple
Wow.
of chickens and some goats. And I finished high school there and joined the military. And that's where my travels started.
Okay. So tell us about military travels. You're the first person to really share about that type of expat journey.
Sure. Well, initially I was just kind of stationed stateside. It's funny. When I joined the military back in 2001, it was really just an opportunity for young kids to get out and see the world, get money to go to college. And so I actually enlisted August 1st, 2001.
Wow.
So at that time, we hadn't had an active war conflict in what, like 20 years. It had been since like the last Gulf War. And so imagine that surprise just a month
Yeah.
later. So it was actually the day that our first day at the gun range. So it was my first time shooting a gun and then finding out I'm probably going to be going to war soon. So that was
Wow.
interesting. Yeah.
How was that for your family?
Well, they really weren't on board with me going to the military anyway. But it was what it was. Initially, so my first enlistment, I did not get deployed, thankfully. But I went back to the military, and it was kind of like, oh, you're back. Okay. So within 6 months, I was deployed to Iraq. And so that was my first trip overseas. And so actually, I wrote a chapter in an anthology last year, and I wrote about how my first international experience without a passport, well, in general, we didn't have a passport, was to Iraq overseas. And so it was just a really surreal time. I liken being on a deployment almost to like living in a soap opera. There's just so many
What
weird
about that?
dynamics going. Yeah, just so many weird dynamics going on. I mean, just imagining walking around day to day and seeing machine gun mounted helicopters flying around like everyday normal life. Yeah, so it was just a really surreal time.
Yeah, I remember being in New York, and uh, all of a sudden on Wall Street there were armed with automatic rifles, guards all over the street. That was very surreal, and that was in the U.S.
Yeah.
So, did you learn anything culturally about the people in Kuwait while you were there, or were you completely isolated? Was it a different mindset?
So, well, this was in Iraq, and there was we had country briefings before we went, so we learned about different cultures and kind of learned to not shake anybody's hand, especially their left hand, because that's typically the hand that you go to the bathroom with, and they don't really use toilet paper. So that was one of I remember that stood out in terms of like the
Yeah.
cultural briefing. Um, We did have third country nationals that were on the base, but obviously for security reasons, we didn't really leave the base unless we were on patrols or we had to go on supply convoys. Um, and what's always interesting about that war to me is a lot of people they think of like the Vietnam War, like World War II with bayonets and like people going out in the front line. But the Iraq War is pretty different in that pretty much everyone was in some sort of danger in terms of where our camp would get hit with rockets, depending on how close we were to freeways. So it was just pretty much, I guess, open opportunity where everyone could be in danger. But the nationals that we did come into contact with, fortunately, in our camp, they were all pretty nice, trustworthy. I know that some camps didn't fare so well in terms of like suicide bombers and things like that that made it into the camp. But fortunately for us, our experiences were pretty positive with the local population.
Okay. So that's very fortunate. And I'm trying to think of how to best formulate this question because being in military, and particularly a war zone, as your first real cross-cultural experience, how do you think that affected you to where you got to now, where you're very multicultural and have experienced other cultures internationally?
Yeah, I would say that it was hard in the fact that my daughter was 3 years old at the time, and that was the first time we had really been away from each other for like more than 24 hours. So in that respect, it was pretty difficult. But I think the plane ride over is something that really stood out to me because we flew on commercial airlines, so it was the whole flight was just military, but it was a I
Mhm.
remember it's I think a one world airplane or something like that. Probably dating myself, but I just remember being on this huge plane and this great food. And so even though like we weren't going for the greatest reason, that's experience stood out to me, and I knew that I wanted to experience that more like on my own terms down the line. And so I think
Okay.
that probably did start the travel bug.
Okay. So once you were out of the military and you could choose what you do on your own terms, tell me about what's next. What came next?
Yeah, so once I got out of the military, I stayed in Texas for a couple of years doing the pretty much the same work that I did in the military. And it would take getting a 50-cent raise for me to start looking for a new job. And I remember at the time I had some friends who had remarked that they had found jobs working overseas as contractors doing the same work that they had done in the military, and they moved to like Middle Eastern countries. So I applied for and got a job in Kuwait. And
Okay.
so this is similar to the military where everything was kind of handled in terms of the logistics. So my flight was booked for me, housing was prepared. So our housing was paid for. We actually lived out in the economy this time. So we weren't restricted to the base, which was nice. So we lived out in the city in 2 bedroom, 2 bathroom apartments. And Kuwait is pretty interesting though, because for the amount of wealth that's there, they don't really, and I haven't been there in a while, probably since 2010, but at that time, they didn't put a lot of public funds into like infrastructure and public safety, public health. Like there would be just mounds of trash lining the
No.
streets. The construction wasn't that great. You'd see the walls just kind of cracking apart, and it
Wow.
was mainly just a place where there was just a lot of people watching. There were a lot of great malls, like they spend a lot of money in malls and shopping and things like that. But in terms of like public health and infrastructure and things like that, I found it to be lacking. But
Okay.
it was super
Well,
close to Dubai and Bahrain, and so I was able to go on different trips. So it was the first year of my life where I went on 3 vacations in a year, so that was great.
So, did you know any Arabic, or did you learn it in that process?
Maybe a few phrases, but that's one of my, I don't have a lot of regrets in life, but that's one of my few regrets that I didn't take it seriously and actually learn the language there.
So, what was it like, traveling to Dubai, the Emirates, and even locally around Kuwait where you were?
Yeah, so the first trip to Dubai, I went by myself for my 26th birthday. So I went there twice that year, one with the guy that I was seeing. First, I went by myself, and then I also went on a couple's trip to Bahrain as well. And so I just always remembered feeling alive in Dubai. Like I swore down I was going to move there one day. 'Cause for me, Dubai, it just feels like the best of all the greatest cities in the world in one place. Like one minute you're like in downtown LA, the next minute you're in South Beach. It's just so many different variances in
Okay.
one small area. So you have the desert, the beach, the city, all in this one little area.
Yeah, it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so, um, so how long were you in Kuwait before you moved on?
I was there for a year. So why I decided to leave is, well, I kind of didn't really have a choice. So it is well, one, illegal to cohabitate there. And my boyfriend and I, we did kind of live together. We both worked for the same company, so we had separate apartments, but we pretty much spent our time in one
Uh,
apartment. And it is illegal to be single and pregnant there. You actually need a marriage license to get prenatal care. And when
okay,
I found out I was pregnant, then I kind of had to make some decisions.
time to move on.
Yeah,
Okay,
because you could literally be jailed even as an American citizen if they found out that you were single and pregnant there. So
wow.
I ended up miscarrying, but I still decided to leave, and I moved back to the States, to Florida for
Okay,
to finish my bachelor's degree.
okay. Um, so then, I know you're not living in the U.S. now. How did you get from Florida? What was the process that drove you to, or that influenced you to make those changes?
Yeah, so after I finished my bachelor's degree, I started to put my resume out really all over the world because at this point, I feel like, I can live anywhere. And the place where I got the most hits was in around Washington, D.C. So I traveled back and forth between there to interview, and I got a job working for a securities regulator. And it was actually a defining moment in my life. So making the move to DC is probably the hardest move I ever made. And so I actually ended up in a homeless shelter for the first 3 months that I lived there. Even though I had a full-time job, I had a car, it just was so difficult to find affordable housing um, in that area, and I had no contacts, no real friends to lean on, and so I actually lived in a homeless shelter in a church for the first 3 months while I
Wow.
found an affordable apartment, a studio, had a deposit, and things like that. And so I think that directly feeds into what I do now in terms of creating a network for clients where they feel safe to make a substantial move like that, a safety net so that they don't end up, on the streets of
Yeah.
whatever country that they move to. And so that actually instilled a fear in me. Up to that point, I had never lived anywhere for more than 2 years, 2.5 years. But I actually stayed in Maryland for 7 years. It got to a point to where I had this phobia of traveling, where I would book a flight, and on the way to the airport, I would cancel the flight and then just not go.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it actually took I was burnt out, overworked, and it took me booking a flight to Dubai 2 weeks later for a week to finally get out of that rut. So, so I had to go back to my favorite place, and then at that point, I started to just kind of like mentally make my exit plan in terms of
Okay.
leaving the U.S. again.
Okay. What was the catalyst for leaving the U.S. this next time?
So the next time, 20, I would say 2017, 2018. So 2016 is when I made the trip to Dubai, and I just realized that I feel more. Don't get me wrong, I love the U.S. U.S. is always home, but I do enjoy like traveling, getting out, and living in different cultures and experiencing different things, and so. I started to apply for jobs overseas again. And I did get a position in Iraq, even though I swore I would never go back there after my deployment. And so, January 2019, I took a job in Iraq. And I think I lasted all of 3 weeks before it triggered a PTSD episode. And
Oh,
yeah, I came back to the US and never really recovered from there. So the military, they granted my early retirement that year. And so from there, with my income cut in half, because I was in sales, I realized that I needed to make some decisions about where I was going to live. And to be able to live, comfortably, it would have to be outside the US.
okay. So feel free to share anything you'd like to about that process, where you ended up, and how you navigated that transition.
Yeah. So another thing is that I struggle with seasonal affective disorder. So cold, dreary weather really affects me physically and mentally. And
Mhm.
so I realized in around October that year that every Friday I would go to the grocery store and just walk around just sobbing in the grocery store. And no one ever asked me, was I okay? And so, are you there, John?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you froze for a minute there. No one ever asked me, was I okay? And so,
I okay. Yeah,
hello.
I can see you fine. I think I'm not sure what's going on with the web right now.
Okay, I
Are you
think we're
still
good
able to
now.
see me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just decided that I was tired of the cold weather and the cold people. So I went home and literally Googled temperate climates. And that search led me to looking at Ecuador and Brazil. And so,
Okay.
yeah, so Loja, Ecuador, and Salvador, Brazil, which I thought was interesting because apparently Salvador, Brazil is like the highest concentration of Afro descendant people outside of Nigeria. And so I was
Okay.
really intrigued by that. And so I started to kind of research to figure out like how I could visit there. And for whatever reason, it was just really, it seemed really difficult to visit, let alone move there. And at the time, Southwest had sales on flights to Costa Rica. And so Costa Rica, like I had heard of it, but it really didn't enter my mind as a destination to move to.
Okay.
But I said, I'm pretty sure I could figure out my life on a beach in Costa Rica. So I booked a trip for a month, put my condo on the market, and I actually got to Costa Rica March 1st, 2020. And so 2 weeks into the trip, fortunately, I had signed up for notifications from the STEP program with the State Department. And so I got an email saying that the airports were going to be closing in a couple of days due to COVID-19, and that we pretty much had 2 days to decide whether we were going to stay or return to the US. And so I almost decided to go back out because back then we were like, oh, this will be over by June. And so I could go back, sign my closing docs, get a couple things out of storage, and then continue on my travels. And so I just kind of at the last minute decided that I would just stay because I booked the place for the month and I would just figure out from there. And so 2 weeks after that, I met my husband. on Tinder.
Wow. Okay. Life comes at you fast sometimes.
Yeah, and so then I really decided to stay. And so 3 years later, we he finally convinced me to check out Nicaragua, which is where he was born. He grew up in Costa Rica, but he was born in Nicaragua. And so he finally
Okay.
convinced me to check it out. And with the rising inflation and cost of living in Costa Rica, we decided to move over to Nicaragua about a month ago.
Okay. So is there, since you move basically next door, globally speaking, is Nicaragua, are there cultural differences that you wouldn't have anticipated moving from Costa Rica to Nicaragua?
Um, yes, well, one in the language. So I feel like I'm learning Spanish all over again. It's like there's always different colloquial terms and things like that
Mhm.
between different dialects. So that's one thing. I did not expect Nicaragua to be as developed as it is.
Okay.
Um, on the news, basically you hear it's like a third world country. It's supposedly the second most poorest country in the world after Haiti, which I don't personally find to be true. And I think statistically it's not even true because first quarter of this year there was $1 billion in remittances that came into Nicaragua from abroad. So I'm not like exactly sure where that data is coming from in terms of it being the second poorest country in the world. Um, Also, in terms of, well, I find to be outside of the US, and my sister and I have had this conversation as well in terms of how basically housing discrimination is legal.
Okay.
So, in the work that I do, a lot of times, and most clients don't see this side of it, but we typically have to present the client's case to landlords because most housing is privately owned outside of the US. So, like apartment complexes are typically condos owned by individual owners. And so, we basically have to present okay, this is a serious retired couple or a digital nomad couple. They work in this industry. They're looking to come to Costa Rica or Nicaragua for a year or 3 years. They're responsible. And basically, off your characteristics, they can say yes or no whether they want to rent their property to you.
Okay.
And, in the US, that's housing discrimination.
So, how did you develop your business? How did you get into this line of work?
Yeah. So, first 6 months in Costa Rica, I was, like your basic retiree beach bum, going to the beach every day, drinking tequila, having a great time. And then I found myself answering questions in expat groups about how I moved to Costa Rica, my process, and things like that. And once it got to the point of answering questions 10 to 20 hours a week, then I started to kind of think of ways that I could really help people systematically just kind of figure out which city in Costa Rica would be the best fit for them. Um, and that would align with their budget, their lifestyle, and their preferences because people seem to sort of think of Costa Rica almost like a city versus a country. So,
Okay.
like there's 12 different microclimates. You know, there's jungle, rainforest, city, beach. And so all of these things factor into like which area is going to be like best for you. Like people they may want to live on the beach, but then they also can't be without internet if the power goes out for a few hours. So you kind of have to reconcile those things and know ahead of time before you uproot your entire family and move to an area that won't fit your needs. And
Mhm.
so I came up with this idea. Well, wouldn't it be great if someone could help people actually narrow down which area would be the best fit for them? Actually, tour that area almost like a day in the life of, and then have the opportunity to meet local expats there and ask questions and build community ahead of their move. And so that's where Melanin Tours was born from.
Great, great. Wow, that's fascinating. So, so do you what geographic areas do you work in?
I cover all of Costa Rica at the moment, and I am considering expanding into Nicaragua now that I'm here. So my husband and I, we split our time between the two countries. So he is a jack of all trades, a massage therapist as well as working in construction. So he does home renovation. So we
Okay.
both still have clientele in Costa Rica. So we pretty much travel back and forth on a monthly basis. So I guess you would say we split our time between the two. I would love to see more people become more curious or more interested in experiencing Nicaragua, because personally, I feel like not only is the scenery more majestic, but I feel like, well, definitely the cost of living, like hands down, is a lot
Yeah.
better in Nicaragua. Um, and I feel like Nicaragua is probably what Costa Rica was 10 to 20 years ago. So,
Okay.
yeah, so I think that it's a very well, and the roads are better here.
Okay.
So I think that when people have more exposure to it beyond what they hear on the news or read in the papers, they'll realize that it's a very viable option. I mean, I came here and we found a great 5 bedroom, 4.5 bathroom house for $1,300 a month.
Wow.
So yeah.
So what types of things do you do for your clients? Is it mostly helping them housing, or are there other things that you do?
Yes, we actually do a full service relocation. So we help with the planning as well as scouting tours, managing the logistics of the move, and we help them apply for residency once they're in country.
Okay. And you can help them with all that?
Yes, we do. So our most popular package is called Ready to Move, and so it's people who are ready to relocate within 6 months or less. They just pretty much need to know the how, when, and the where, and so that's been our most popular package, where we'll start them out. And what's becoming more popular, I see a lot of digital nomads, and people want to go on. I guess I call them language sabbaticals. So I've had quite a few people this year contact me wanting to do a 1 year sabbatical in a Latin American country to learn Spanish and just experience different cultures and work remotely from a different country. And so basically, we set them up on that package where we help them plan out the move. We do a virtual tour and secure housing for them. So everything is set up once they get here, and help
Mhm.
them. We also submit the digital nomad visa location application for them as well.
Oh, wow. That's a great service. Okay.
It's been great.
So is it mostly helping people learn from your mistakes? Is that kind of how you got started?
Um, I would say not so much mistakes. I feel like COVID was an interesting time. So it allowed me and my husband to be able to move around to different apartments throughout that time without being tethered to a 1 year lease, which is usually the condition of getting better pricing. So we got
Uh-huh.
to move around and experience things at pandemic pricing.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it was more just kind of like my mind just thinks in trends and patterns and associations. And so it was born out of a desire to help people be able to kind of just sift through a huge amount of data. Because like I personally would spend many nights until 2 a.m. on YouTube, different blogs, and there's just so many opinions and blogs and YouTube channels out there,
Mhm.
and sometimes a lot of misinformation as well. So just kind of like um, filtering through all of that data and helping people identify what's relevant to them. So I typically work with female entrepreneurs that are usually pretty busy, and they just value their time more than um, going through and spending all that time trying to figure out and getting over, just going down the rabbit hole and getting overwhelmed with the process. And so they just want a trusted advisor that they can go to help them navigate the process.
That's great. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about when you first got to Costa Rica. How prepared were you to get started there?
So like I mentioned, I had gone online and been researching Brazil and Ecuador, and Costa Rica was literally not on the plan. It was just I saw that there were sale flights on sales, but I did start to look into some of the blogs that were there. There were a few good ones that really stood out in terms of information that was factual and just really streamlined. So I started out on the Pacific coast in Guanacaste. I found a studio for $800 a month, which at that time I thought was a great deal. And so the following month, when it went down to $300, I realized it was not such a great deal.
Wow. So, so how, and remind me, how long were you planning originally to spend in Costa Rica before you came back to the U.S.?
I was not going back to the US. So my
Okay.
plan was to stay in Costa Rica for a month, travel throughout the country, and decide whether that could be a place I would want to stay. But I really wanted to move on to Brazil and possibly to Barcelona.
Barcelona. Okay.
Hmm. Don't ask me
Um,
why, it just came up in my head.
how did you prepare to move internationally like that?
I put, as I mentioned, I sold my condo. I had a really hard time parting with my stuff, so
Yeah.
everything to this day is still in storage.
Okay.
Yeah, mainly because I wanted to keep my bed. I had found a black velvet tufted sleigh bed online after searching for months and months, and I was like, I'm gonna keep this bed. And now I'm like, I literally could have got this bed made 3 times over in the money that I spent keeping it in storage.
So,
So now I tell people, unless there's like this insane emotional attachment, just sell everything and rebuy it in your new
yeah,
location.
I find getting rid of my stuff is very cathartic sometimes,
Really?
and nothing helps you do that like a big move like that.
I think I literally will need to just have someone else just go and do a yard sale for me, because even when I go back to visit that storage, I fall in love with that stuff all over again. I'm like, oh, I can't get rid of
Uh,
it. And
that's good.
$160 every month.
So, how fluent were you in Spanish when you first got to
Oh,
Costa Rica?
so even though I took Spanish 1, 2, and 3 in high school, I took 2 years of Spanish in college. When I was with Verizon, they paid for 2 courses with Berlitz, so I took a lot of Spanish. But when I got to Costa Rica, I was barely a high beginner. Um,
Yeah.
and so my husband, he was barely a beginner English. So a
Okay.
lot of our early conversations were Google Translate facilitated.
So yeah, that's actually pretty common. A lot of the people that we coach here at Fluency Corp are often fairly fluent conversationally, but and that's how we started is uh, being in that situation where you're internationally, you think you're fluent, and then you find out you're not as fluent as you think you were, and now you need someone to help you take that next step.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that immersion piece, I guess, was the key that unlocked everything for me. Um, and I think that's because I personally feel like in the US, it's not very easy to practice with native speakers. They're not as
Uh-huh.
forgiving when you make mistakes. And so, like, no one wants to be ridiculed or laughed at when they're trying to learn a language. Um, and I feel like Costa Rica is probably the best place to learn Spanish in an
Yeah.
immersion type of environment because they're just very friendly and very they just appreciate that you want to learn the language and that you want to practice.
Okay. So, how quickly were you able to pick up the language?
So between speaking every day in Spanish with my husband, watching television, different apps, and working with a Spanish tutor, I would say in like a year I'd gotten up to an advanced level.
Okay, it's
Yeah.
great.
I think my
Um,
favorite thing was a 60 episode documentary on Simon Bolivar in Netflix. So I recommend that to everybody.
okay. So, any um, any missed opportunities uh, that if you had to do it over again, we can go back to your time uh, in Kuwait and in Iraq,
Yeah.
Dubai to now. That anything that you would uh, that you would advise someone now if you I wish I knew this then.
Yeah, I definitely would have put more effort into learning Arabic. After I left, I did try a couple of audiobooks, but especially knowing what I know now, that immersion piece is just it's gold. So I definitely would have put more effort into learning the language while I was there.
Okay. Um, so sorry, I got distracted for a second. Uh, so if we could look back over your expat career, if we'll kind of looking from 1 to 10, what what stands out as positives? What do you wish was different, maybe in each of those experiences?
Let's see. So, that's a good question. The positives in Iraq, I would say, now that I think about it, I think that was just my first flight in general, not just
Yeah,
international. Yeah. So just really opening up that opportunity to travel and just kind of planting that seed for me. Um, and yeah, I don't think that I would have had the confidence to just move abroad and live outside of the U.S. for a year without that kind of forced experience. So I think that that was like a big positive from that. Kuwait, I yeah, I'm very thankful for that opportunity to be able to work in something that I loved at the time and be able to travel more and obviously vacation more and
yeah,
just it was kind of like taking the training wheels off. So going from like a full military assisted relocation to like each of these moves where I started to kind of learn more and more about what it entails to actually move yourself and a family to a different country.
but
So you
do
know
you
what?
I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, and now that I think about it, like all of these, because in Iraq when I was deployed, I actually worked in the it was called the mayor's cell. So basically, it was the office that was responsible for running the camp. And so we handled all the housing and the billeting. So, like, all of the, now that I look back over the path, like, everything was kind of leading up to what I do now.
So do you find, is it common for people that you interact with to first want to kind of cluster around other expats, or are they more adventurous and want to get out and become a temporary local if they're not staying permanently, or is it all over the board?
It's usually the opposite. So, and I usually caution against that. So, okay, I personally feel that a reason why the cost of living is so high in Costa Rica is because of this perceived idea of safety, and that comes with a premium. And
Okay.
so people pay more to live there because they perceive it to be the most safe Latin American country.
Okay.
Um, and in that, there's this idea that you can just come and live amongst the local population, and there'll just be this immediate acceptance, and you can just interact and learn the language, immersion, like you just get up, walk off the plane with no language skills whatsoever. And you just don't, it's not that realistic. One, I try to explain to people, one, no matter what circumstances you come from in the United States, whether you're living paycheck to paycheck, you live in projects, or you live in Beverly Hills, you're always going to have more money and more resources than most people in Latin American countries, and that's just the reality. And
Okay.
so, like anywhere, there are good people and there are not so good people. And so, if you haven't built the time into, one, learning the language, and two, growing and building a network with, like, getting to know local people and actually building a network, you can't realistically expect them to open up this haven of protection for you. So that, and I feel like that's where a lot of people get into trouble in terms of where you start to see home invasions. Because I try to explain to people, unless you're planning to come to Costa Rica and live completely off the grid, no electronics, no watches, no telephone, no iPhones, no laptops, no TVs, you're always going to have more than like your local neighborhood. You decide that you want to live outside of the expat neighborhoods. And with that, you have to be careful in terms of who is accessing your property, because at that point you don't know these people. They
Hmm.
could possibly be reporting to other people, oh, this person has this, they have that, and then next thing you know, your home's been invaded. It possibly may not be as violent as it could be in the United States, but at that point, you've been violated.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if you kind of opened yourself up to it because of, and I could get flack for this, but I would say willful ignorance and not like respecting that. It's almost kind of like a flaunt in front of like the community, like I have these things, and you don't see it like that because you see your lifestyle as simple, maybe even meager. But for someone who's earning you know $30 a week, or $10 to $15 a day, and something as simple as a microwave to you, like, or a toaster, that's a necessity to us, that is probably a day's work of pay for them. Like, that's insensitive.
Yeah.
um so I usually recommend to clients, you don't have to start out in a full-on expat neighborhood. We can find you something with a local mix. So, like, mostly local population, mostly expat, or even like a middle class neighborhood, a step down. So, not coming into a complete culture shock, coming into something that's familiar, learn the language, and then in a year, when you've gotten your footing, then you can go out and buy some land in like a further out town outside of the city, get to know your neighbors and build a community and make a positive impact, because that's the other side of the coin. Um, Most times we don't know the true cost of living in the area, and we come in and we see something that could be half of what we would pay in the United States, but that could still be 50% more of what the locals would pay. And then you have gentrification happening.
Yeah.
So it's just creating a bad experience on both sides. So it's just like, come in, step down, learn the language, get to know the area, build your connections, get to know local expats. Like, you don't just need to come in and jump into the deep end of the pool.
That's great advice. Thank you. So we've touched on culture shock. Are there other things culturally? Just bringing up the term culture shock. Is there anything in particular that leaps out at you that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, again, just don't take things for granted in terms of some culture shocks for me going into Costa Rica. One is the idea that hot water is a luxury.
Okay.
um, there's something called a suicide shower, where they have these shower heads that have like electric cables hooked up to them through in the ceiling to heat the water. It sounds
Okay.
very dangerous, because it is, and that can be something prevalent. Like, so my husband, he already knows. Like, I'm pretty much banned from booking things on Airbnb, because he's like, why do you keep booking these places? You know you're not gonna stay there. So that's something. Then also in a lot of areas in the country, you can't flush toilet paper. That's a
Mhm.
no for me. Like, I need to be able to flush toilet paper. The water is potable, so you can drink the water in Costa Rica. I personally, even in the United States, I don't drink tap water. That's just me anywhere I
Mhm.
go. But you can drink the water in Costa Rica. Um, let's say, so like the suicide showers, the toilet paper, hot water. That's definitely a necessity. So these are, in our intake quiz when we start working with clients. So these are questions that we ask. Like, is it important to you that you have hot water? Like, also, housing unfurnished means unfurnished. Like, that's no appliances, no furniture. So
Okay.
so, we teach clients when they're looking for housing, if you see linea blanca, that means it at least has appliances. But if it doesn't, then it is truly unfurnished, and you'll need to buy those things, which is not a problem. It's not that expensive in certain areas. And, we help them find more affordable appliances. But those are just like some culture shock things that I found that were
Okay.
different from the US.
What about reverse culture shock?
Reverse culture shock. So I would say I was just in the U.S. a couple of weeks ago, and I remember thinking, "Oh my God, where are all the local coffee shops? Like, this Starbucks just isn't doing it for me. Like, I just want a regular latte in a mug."
So how often do you come back to the States?
I try to come more than 2 to 3 times a year. I came more, so I just relocated my mother to Nicaragua with me for she's recovering from a stroke, and so we would never have been able to afford to have a nurse come in 12 hours a day, 7 days a week in the United States. Like, that just wouldn't have happened. Here, we were fortunate to find a company where for less than $30 a day, we have a nurse that comes in to attend to her 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Um, so I don't have to travel there as much as possible. Well, as much as I used to kind of make sure that she was situated in her nursing home and she's getting much better care. And so, yeah, that's pretty much
Yeah.
that.
So just before we wrap up, and I haven't seen any particular questions in the chat. If you have any questions for Celeste, please ask them while we still have the opportunity. Celeste, I noticed a particular pattern with you with things happening right after you commit to a life change. You joined the military in 2001, traveling to Costa Rica in March of 2020, or 2020. Is there anything that you'd like to share more about that? Did that feel surreal? Did you feel like, here we go again? Anything like that?
I think you noticed that pattern before I did, but yeah, I don't think I could have predicted 9/11 was going to happen.
Yeah.
But I did feel just like a nudging to kind of branch out as opposed to, because I didn't apply to any universities in high school. I wasn't necessarily thinking about the military. Well, actually, that's not true. I had a cousin that was in the Marines. So when I was 14, I kind of mentally committed that I was going to the Marines. And that shifted, and I ended up going to the Army. But yeah, I would just chalk that up to intuition, where somehow, some way, I always kind of knew, like a few months. So I kind of heard little grumblings here and there about the coronavirus in January. I paid a lot of attention to like world news and things like that, and then I'm always online. So I heard like little things here and there about the coronavirus, but didn't really take it as serious like most people. But I did. I'm thankful that I listened to my intuition in a lot of cases, and just kind of like, I've never been afraid to take a chance and just go. Like when I left Florida after I finished my degree, I literally just packed everything up. And one day I made the decision that morning, just packed everything up and just left. It was like, I'll figure it out when I get there. And it has led to some hard life lessons. I'll say that. So it is my passion to help other people, to your point, to kind of learn from those impulsive decisions. I won't say mistakes. So like I have a true inner knowing that, I'm always going to end up where I need to be. But if I can make someone's transition stress-free and a lot easier, because everyone does not have the luxury to just jump up and move and figure things out. I don't know if that Brazilians came from the military or where it came from, but like for some people, that's just not realistic. And so I do have a passion in helping people figure out how to make those moves in a more coordinated manner.
And that transition period is so important. Learned that in my own life, and really am glad to know what you do and a little bit more about you. Is there anything before we go that is unsaid? Any last piece of advice or anything you'd like to share?
Well, one of my mantras that I love is that you usually, not always, but you usually meet the best people on the other side of your prejudices, aka preferences. So just be open-minded and just be open.
Great advice. Well, thank you so much, Celeste. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. And if you'd like to know more about Melanin Tours, you can see the URL on the screen there. And if there's any other questions that we can answer from Fluency Corp, or if Celeste can answer, don't hesitate to reach out. And everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you, Celeste.
Thank you, John.